1040.com podcast. Your taxes, smart and simple.
Hi, and welcome to the 1040.com podcast. I'm Sue, and today we have James Stork back on the podcast to talk about a little bit of breaking news with taxes. We don't get that a lot, so we are talking about the new 1040 Postcard. But before we get into that, James, how are you?
I'm good.
You have a lot of paperwork.
I am on my notes.
This is a lot more complicated than I thought it was going to be. I walked in.
This is what tax simplification looks like.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Yes.
This is our business too. I walked in with my little postcard like, this is what we're going to talk about. And James looks like he's trying to solve like a murder case on the couch. It's like, oh, this is different. So anyway, it's not going to be that intense. We just basically wanted to kind of go through, talk about what the simplification is, what the new Form 1040 is going to look like, and kind of how it works. So, so that you guys aren't confused, and we'll take the lots of paperwork and kind of condense it down. So it'll be good
Great.
stuff. Okay, so just kicking it off, how does this new postcard work? Like we've heard a lot. It's been really big in the news and politics. You know, people have been kind of back and forth like, oh, you know, what is it? What does it actually do? So just in a very bare bones, you know, what is it objectively? How does this new postcard tax form work?
Sure. So everybody's familiar with the big tax reform, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act 2017, and the fact that it goes into effect in 2018. Most of the provisions go into effect in 2018. And interestingly enough, they all sunset, or a lot of them sunset in 2025. So these are all considered temporary provisions unless Congress extends them. So it's the biggest reform we've seen in over 30 years.
Wow.
And there's a lot going on with the actual changes to the law, which of course impact the forms and the way we prepare taxes. And so what we're seeing and what we've just learned this past week is that the Treasury Secretary has announced that the 1040 is going to be reformatted and to where it will fit on a half of a sheet of paper, or essentially a postcard-sized form, front and back. And it goes back to the middle of 2017 when I think it was a speaker had a big event with the National Association of Manufacturers, and he said that the tax code was going to be simplified enough to where the form for most filers would fit on a postcard. So all of that, it sounds really good, but when you really dig into it and you understand the tax law changes that came with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there are a lot of really good things in there that are beneficial to taxpayers, with the credits being, some of the limits being increased, the standard deduction being doubled so that more people will be able to claim the standard and probably won't spend the time trying to figure out if they could itemize their deductions. But in looking at the 1040 itself, most of the line items did not go away. They didn't eliminate a bunch of deductions from page 1. You still have most of the credits and other taxes on page 2. So what does it mean to take a 2-page form with roughly 78 lines on it, or front and back, to a postcard? And so we've been looking at some of the draft forms that they've released, and what has to happen is what they do is they start trimming sections off of the 1040, and so they take 10, 12, 15 line items where you report adjustments to income, and they create a schedule for it, a separate sheet of paper or a separate form where those line items will be compiled, added up, and then the total will carry to the 1040. So you end up shrinking the form by taking chunks of it and creating supporting schedules.
So the information's still the same, it's just on separate pieces of paper. And one of the pieces of paper is short.
Right.
Yay! Yeah, it seems like when we were, talking about this, it seems more like instead of taking the 2-page form and saying, okay, this is where you'll report most of your information, now it's a postcard size that's front and back, that's more the hub of a wheel. So it says, okay, this is more of a summary of all these other different worksheets and schedules, like you said, where you go and you figure out what items need to go on that hub sort of form.
Right. So if you have a very basic tax scenario, you have wages, you don't have any additional credits or taxes that you have to pay, you don't have any deductions. So, very basic. Even dependents, you can have a few dependents. In that case, when you look at the form, the finished form, it is going to look simpler because you're not having to look at all of these lines that have nothing on them, all of these extra deductions and credits. It looks simpler, but when you think about how you prepare a tax return, whether you go to a professional or whether you do it yourself online, you don't really interact with the form itself very much anymore. Your online products like 1040.com, we're going to walk you through an interview and ask you all the questions related to everything that gets reported on the 1040 without showing you the form. Because it's cleaner and easier that way. And when you hand your stuff over to a preparer, they're using software too, where they're answering the questions, and then the end result is producing the form.
Right. I was going to ask about that, like how it's different, for people who are e-filing or people who are having their taxes prepared. I think a lot of the buzz around this was, you won't have to file online or you won't have to hire a preparer because you'll just be able to do it very simply. And people always have the option to file it on their own and mail it in, that sort of thing. But the actual process, it's the process that's changing, not necessarily the details of it. So, but again, I mean, that's kind of good news for us because it's like we're still going to be just as easy to use as we've ever been because we do go through that interview style process. So even for people that, I mean, I know for me before I was working in taxes, even the postcard, I'd have been like, it looks like it's still kind of intimidating, as you look at even the draft. So, so just understanding that, yes, it's a different process when you're actually dealing with the forms, but for those who e-file and those who hire a preparer, it really won't, there won't be much of a difference seen.
Right. The overwhelming majority of filers won't see an impact in the way they file their taxes. But one of the things that's going to be interesting is that those people with more complicated situations now are going to be dealing with extra forms and supplemental schedules, and that you could argue that that's moving away from simplification, at least for those tax filers.
Right.
But again, it's if you're going to a professional or if you're filing online with 1040, the process is going to be the same. Cool.
All right. Well, do you have anything else to add on all that? We've talked about how the postcard works, how it relates to there's the 1040, the Form 1040, then all of the worksheets and the schedules that will refer back to that if you need them. We talked about how it's simpler in from a certain point of view that you don't have to look at all of those, like you said, empty line items. But in another way, it could be more complicated for people with complicated tax situations. And we also talked about how it affects people who are e-filing versus people who would rather try to do it on paper. And again, if people want to do it and it is simpler for them, then that's always an option. But understanding that from the e-filing perspective, not much will be changing. It'll still be great, especially with 1040.com.
That's right. And one of the interesting things about it is that really to appreciate this concept of a postcard, you would have to do it on paper. Because even if you fill out the form online and print it, you're most likely going to print it on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and mail it in. So you're gonna end up with a blank bottom half of the form.
Right.
So it's you would have to be interacting with this postcard, this form on paper, but the IRS is really pushing everybody to file online, file electronically, because it's so much easier for them on the back end to process electronic returns than paper returns. So, so they don't really. The IRS doesn't necessarily want people filing on paper at all anymore. In fact, there's a mandate to get as many people to file electronically as possible.
Wow.
I don't know. It's just it's a really interesting twist to the upcoming season. I think we were all geared and prepared for tax reform. I know our staff's been diligently working through the interview and how we can adapt the law changes and continue to make it a very easy, straightforward interview to get through. But these changes to the form, it really adds an interesting twist, not only for us that are developing software. The IRS certainly has to modify the forms, all the instructions, and even there's impacts to the state tax agencies because they have forms and instructions that reference the federal 1040 and line items on the 1040, so they have to go through all their stuff and figure out what may be impacted, what has to be updated. So it's a far-reaching change, and to learn about it in June, there's definitely time to adapt, but we'll have to see this coming year what type of an impact it really has. Do people feel like it's a simpler process or not?
That'll be really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys, for watching. This was episode 23, I think, of the podcast. So thanks for watching. Tune in next time. We will be talking about taxes and various financial information if you are getting married, things that you need to know now for January when you go to start filing your taxes. So tune in next time, and we'll see you then.